I'm introducing Ryota, and he's going to talk about when to not Nix.
Thank you very much. So I'm Ryota, so I'm going to be giving a talk about when not to Nix, working with external config and SOPS Nix. And you can find me on most platforms with RYTSWD, which is my full name without vowel, so hopefully easy enough to remember. And I'm here at NixCon, but talking about not to Nix. Hopefully this is not going to offend too many people. Hopefully this is something that could be useful for some people. So brief agenda first. So I'll start with a quick intro of myself and about this talk, what this talk is about, and what this talk is not about. We'll touch on beauty of Nix first, because I do want to talk about Nix, how it is useful, how it is powerful, before going to when not to Nix. And when not to Nix, there are a few things that I would like to touch on. Before going into SOPS Nix specifically, I want to touch on SOPS because I did find it very confusing. Hopefully I can shed some light there. And wrapping up, I will just have a quick summary at the end. Quick intro of myself. So I'm Ryota. I'm a software engineer of a decade of experience, mainly in finance industry, and have been focusing on Kubernetes cloud-native ecosystem mostly. I've been using Nix for 2 years and have 2 kids, and I'm currently doing full-time parenting, so not really working. So open for the next job opportunity. If you have anything, let me know. And about this talk, so it will be about overview of how you can do in Nix way, and also how you don't have to always use Nix. So just a bit of mixed up, and hopefully this is a beginner-friendly overview. And example of how non-Nix config is actually helpful in some scenarios. And we'll go into SOPS Nix, where you could use Nix, obviously, but also there are a few ways that you can interact with SOPS Nix that could be useful to know about, where you might actually have something external to Nix. And this talk is not about exhaustive review of config management in general. That would be too much time-consuming. And deep dive into SOPS Nix isn't something I would be the right person to do. So this is probably an overview, hopefully something that's beginner-friendly, but also something that you can maybe find something useful there. You can find my talk material in GitHub, RYTSWD, NixCon-2025, and also I will be pulling some of the code config for this exact machine that I have running, which is using the Nix config. So if I can just briefly look at it, this is my conference talk, so you can see all the agenda. If you want to just sneak peek of what I would be talking about, it's all here. And also the configuration of my machine setup is in here, which I will be referencing in my talk as well. So with that, let's get into the beauty of Nix first. So although this talk will focus on the use of non-Nix configuration, we should also highlight how Nix can make things very easy to manage. So unifying with Nix is something that I really appreciate how Nix can do that. So one example that I personally have is I just pulled out some configuration that I found from up the top. It was a Flameshot, just happened to be. Flameshot uses .ini config that you can find in their official example in the GitHub repository. And you can just convert it to settings. And then in general, you might want to disable a tray icon, which I do. And also show startup launch message. Maybe you don't need that. So that's something that you can easily do with Nix, and pretty readable, easy to understand, structured, very useful. And another example of that I picked up was GPG agent, where config can be very lengthy. It's indeed, if you look at the reference down in my repository, it's quite lengthy, much more lengthy than what I'm showing here. But you can show the configuration in a way that's easy to parse. Maybe not exactly how the original config would look like, even with the syntax highlight on. And even going further, declarative and functional configuration is something that I appreciate quite a bit. I have done here configuration for fish shell, and I will be just looking at it a little bit more closely. But I have essentially the same code for fish, Z-shell, and bash with a slight adjustment. So I'm currently using that as a, I guess, a replacement or the tool for ls to list the files. I used to not like it, so I used to be able to configure so that I can have the flag turned off, so I can see the fish setting with aliases set with ESA. In this fish setup, maybe I can reuse the code with Z-shell separately, and then I would say, okay, with ESA false for Z-shell specific setup. So all these configuration is declarative, has function in there so that you can switch and change as you like for a particular setup, and that's something I appreciate, and I think that's the beauty of Nix. And when not to Nix. So Nix is absolutely flexible and powerful, but also sometimes I feel unnecessary or unfriendly sometimes. So when using expressive configuration like YAML or TOML, I do know that YAML can be really confusing. I do know that those configurations are not very user-friendly all the time, but some configurations that might be easy to read. And for me, this particular one, I chose Sway NC as an example. It's a notification center. And Sway NC, you can configure with JSON config, but also you can style it with CSS. And CSS, I find it really difficult to do within Nix code. You can do that with string, CSS string right there in the config. But what I found was that maybe I just use SCSS. With the Sway NC specific CSS handling, there is a lot of duplicated CSS selector that you need to specify. Maybe it was easier to just have SCSS so that I can use the SCSS modularization and also variable definitions, and even maybe nesting, so that this is an SCSS code where I define some variables, and then within the CSS actual config, I can say that I would just pull in the variables from SCSS, so that that's how I would like to style my Sway NC in this case. And with that, I found that it was easier to manage rather than going to Nix code and then use the Nix syntax. So I have a separate file, which is in SCSS, that generates CSS later and then just pulls in to configure Sway, or in this case, Sway NC. And also, there is a case that when there is a community solution outside of Nix that you might just want to use it as is. You can obviously convert that, translate it into Nix way. But also, if you are to convert it, you're sort of losing the ability to keep up with those community updates. So when you have the community solution pulled in directly, you might be able to just follow the community updates without really doing too much. So in this case, I was looking at Sway look, another Sway-related example, where I just pulled in some reference and then just used it rather than converting into Nix. So that might be one consideration that you can have. And in this config, this config is not that fancy or like looking really nice, but also it is not something I care too much. I do care about the actual configuration and how my machine works, but the actual details of how I can update the Sway look interface or experience might be something that I can just kind of allow for the community to grow and just kind of pull that into my config. And another one is when just there is no Nix solution available. You can make one, but for instance, this one is Swappy, which is a Wayland snapshot editing tool. And as of writing, as far as I could find, I couldn't see a home manager support for it. I use home manager for most of the things, and what I have been talking about just so far has been Nix config or home manager config. Because this was not supported, there is no support for Swappy, I just said, okay, I might not make it too difficult to make the configuration. I just say, okay, here's the dump of the string, which is not really looking nice, but it's simple, short, and understandable for me. And this might not be very nice looking config, but it is one way to work with it. So you can say Swappy config, which is set to default of saving pictures and screenshots. So this is maybe a way to go about it. It might not be all the time, but it's just good to know that you have an option like that. And lastly, when I want to have really fast experimentation and iteration, like when I edit the file, I want to see the action immediately. That's the case where I don't really want to rebuild the Nix setup. So these are specific examples that I have are Emacs. Exactly, this is Emacs setup that you're seeing right now, and also NeoVim and some editor configuration that I change constantly. I don't want to rebuild and kind of get into the iteration that's slow to iterate. That's a case where it might make sense to move away from Nix, maybe during the iteration. Maybe once it's done, you might be able to come back to Nix way, but this is something that I found more friendly for my liking. And I would like to go into talk about SOPS Nix, but before that, I need to talk about SOPS. So SOPS stands for Secret Operations, kind of strange setup. The acronym doesn't really match up. But anyways, so you can find it at getsops.io. You can find more information in there. But just quick overview of SOPS. SOPS supports JSON, YAML, .env, and binary. And it doesn't, as far as I know, it doesn't support TOML by default, and which I'll be touching on that a little bit later. So SOPS, if you have a data like this, my name, email, some example.com, and you can use the SOPS command for encryption, and the encryption command looks like this: SOPS encrypt, and you provide the raw file, and then maybe you can output to another file. You can also use the same file so that you would have an encrypted version of the exact config. And this config will look like, this is going to be pretty long, so let me just zoom out a little bit so that you can kind of see the structure. So you can see that the name is still there, email is still there, so that YAML configuration would still have the keys, but you don't have the actual details of what the value looks like. This is how SOPS does the encryption, and you can see that the SOPS encrypted in a way that can be decrypted only for these recipients with the AGE keys. That's specifically how I did it. I will be talking about it a little bit more. And there's a little bit more details as to how SOPS does the encryption. And SOPS provides, let me just zoom in once again. SOPS provides a friendly editing experience. So where you have an encrypted file, you can just say SOPS and then provide the encrypted file, and then you will be directly navigated to your editor so that you can see the encrypted data decrypted first. You will be put to an editor. You can edit however you like, and once you're done with it, you close or you save the file, and then it will be encrypted once again, so that you don't really have to think about SOPS being in place. You can just directly edit the file. And one important bit is that there is .sops.yaml file that defines what kind of keys you want to use for the SOPS. This is specific for how SOPS works, but you can provide multiple keys. Let's say I have a personal key that's different from work key, and if there's anything that I want to share with a colleague, I can just put in another key for the colleague to use, so that whenever I have some key data that I want to share with the work setup, I can just configure it so that I will be encrypting with the recipient set to myself and another colleague or multiple colleagues. And there are a few creation rules and SOPS details that you can find more about in the slide, but also in the official SOPS documentation. So with that SOPS understanding kind of nailed at this point, let's go into SOPS Nix into Mix. So Nix with SOPS is something that I found quite confusing because I didn't quite understand SOPS to begin with. So it's possible that I have some wrong information. I hope not. But if there is something that you found wrong, please let me know. But first of all, SOPS Nix is under github.com mic92 SOPS Nix. So you can find that's the official repository. SOPS Nix basic, I would like to touch on that. So SOPS Nix provides NixOS module as well as home manager module, and each stores the secret data into /run secrets or xdg config home, and then there is a directory that will be created, sops-nix/secrets respectively. Using SOPS under the hood, obviously, and SOPS Nix decrypts the SOPS file during activation and puts the actual secret data into that directory location. So if you have a configuration like this, let me just zoom out a little bit, you can have SOPS saying you want to use the default SOPS file, default encrypted SOPS file, and then you would be looking at, this one was particularly YAML, so you can use that YAML syntax, and then you can specify where the secrets will be saved. And that secret will be saved as the name or email in this case. So I have some comment in here that below maps to the value in the example YAML, which we saw it was just email and name. And each entry here will create a file. So it's SOPS Nix. If it was a home manager setup, you would create xdg config home and then SOPS Nix secrets. And inside of the directory, I will be having a name as a file name, which contains my name from the SOPS. And SOPS Nix is pretty flexible with how files are stored. So you saw the direct mapping between name and the actual file name, but you can change it if you wanted to. You can find more information about that in SOPS Nix official documentation. And using secret information from SOPS, you can just use it as is because the file has the data. You can just use it as the key data, or you can just put that into environment variable, for instance, and you can say export some API key, and then you get the config SOPS secrets is something that you can enable from SOPS setup, and then you can get the path to cat out the actual data. So this is a standard way to work with secret data, but there is one more thing that I was hoping to find, and that's something that I wanted to highlight because I think it's not always highlighted in when you're using SOPS Nix. So SOPS Nix supports this thing called template. And template is something that you can have a dedicated config, whatever the file format is. So in this case, I have a TOML file, which if you remember, SOPS doesn't support TOML by default, but SOPS template can be anything. And this is a TOML file where if you provide this particular placeholder template string, it will be replaced with the key data, or the actual value of the encrypted data. So if I were to go in to have a look what the use case would be with this stupid example, is that for my name, I can use a placeholder based on name as the secret placeholder SHA-256. So if I do built-in hash string of SHA-256 of name, I get this 828A blah string, which I can just pass in here, which will be replaced during the SOPS Nix activation as a templated string. So similarly, I can do email with the same setup. And with these in place, what I need to do is to make sure that I call SOPS templates and then some config with secret embedded. This is just a random name. And then I get the file of the TOML file, which is the template where I can pass in, this is the file that will be created. The TOML file, config.toml is going to be something that it gets created. No, the other way around, sorry. The file is the input of the template, and the path is where the file actually gets created, so that you can have xdg config home containing the actual value data within the config of any format. With that quick summary, so Nix has various options, as you probably are familiar with, for managing configuration. And there is no single right answer, and which would make sense is really heavily context dependent. But sometimes external solutions like SOPS Nix may require the configuration to be kept in a separate file, which is okay, which is one way to work with Nix and Nix configuration. And some other thoughts that I want to share is I have all my Emacs and NeoVim configurations saved as separate repositories, which I am considering to revisit. So maybe that's something I need to go about. And if there is anything you found inaccurate or incorrect, please let me know. I tried to do as much research as I could. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryota.